y'all, Scott here. Have you seen something that looks like this?
If you found that, that's me caring about the Nintendo 64. Please dispose of it immediately. I know, I'm putting these up, and I just like the attention.
Family photo. Oh god, that's embarrassing. That's better. The Nintendo 64, one of the most revolutionary consoles of all time, helped standardize how games in the third dimension look, play, and control, introduced so many genres, franchises, concepts, and I still don't give a I'm being a bit harsh here. It's not that I don't like the Nintendo 64, I just don't care about it. This is not my favorite Nintendo console. It's not my least favorite, but this is one of the tougher ones to go back to for me. I totally understand its worth and why to many this is their favorite, and I love so many of the things everybody else loves about this guy. But after I dug my grave, I decided to dig back into this system, look back at what gave it its groove, the games, the accessories, the innovation, the lack of Scott giving. Everything that made the Nintendo 64 the Nintendo 64. I want to learn to love this console, because as it stands, it's alright. But that won't do. I have to appreciate everything Nintendo does for me. Criticism is just whining. Nintendo made buttons. What did you do, Dad? Well, let's go back to the beginning here, where everything precisely started. The mid-90s. Nintendo was king of the video game space. Their first two consoles, the Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo Entertainment System, both were at the top of the food chain in nearly every category. They had the best games, the best developers, the best sales. They were the video game company. There's a reason people would call any video game thing a Nintendo. It's like, Mom, this is a calculator. However, as time went on, more and more competition started appearing. And not only that, they weren't complete laughingstocks. Pretty much most consoles that fought against the original NES, there's a reason I dug this grave deeper than usual. But with the SNES, Sega brought the big guns with their Genesis and ended up taking a lot of market share away from Nintendo, even surpassing them for a brief moment. And when Nintendo was working to create a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo, they worked with Sony on it, but canceled plans after re-evaluating their contract. This made Sony so mad they created a worldwide phenomenon out of spite. Basically, Sega was legitimately scaring Nintendo and me, and Sony was a promising up-and-coming rival. They were burned by Nintendo and wanted to make their own video game console, and this isn't even covering the dozens of other companies that tried. Nintendo couldn't just sit there and expect everybody to only want Nintendo products. Sega customers proved that not everybody was born a Nintendo diehard. So, they had to get to work on a successor to the Super Nintendo, and near the end of the console's life, it was pretty obvious where the video game industry was heading. Downhill! This console. 3D graphics and gameplay was the next big thing. Games like Donkey Kong Country and Star Fox gave us a taste as to how 3D can change how games look and play. Of course, cramming all of this onto a Super Nintendo cartridge, while possible, it felt more like they were shoehorning these types of games on the system. For Donkey Kong Country, they would create 3D models of these characters and recreate them in the form of a 2D SNES sprite. That was one way to get 3D looking games on your Super Nintendo, but what if you didn't have to do that? What if the game console could create 3D visuals right from the get-go? Well, Nintendo partnered with Silicon Graphics to do such a thing, announcing their collaboration on Project Reality in 1993. Yeah, Reality. At the time, these were the graphics dreams were made of. Like, the tech demos shown off weren't too far off from full-blown computer animation. By 1994, the official name of Project Reality was revealed, the Nintendo Ultra 64, Nintendo's next home console. I love adjectives and numbers, I'm sold. If you think game companies trying to push how powerful their consoles are now is a bit much, they made the defining feature of this console's name a tech spec. It's like Sony naming their next PlayStation the PlayStation GDDR6. 64 refers to how this console was 64 bits. Mom, don't you care? Bits were the hot ticket item back then. It all boiled down to how many bits does your console have? The NES only had 8, but the Genesis had 16, but the Super Nintendo had 16 as well, and the Sega Saturn and PlayStation were 32, but just for good measure, Nintendo skipped all the way over to 64. Technically, Nintendo had a 32-bit system at the time, the Virtual Boy, and even that had the codename of VR32, showing how important bits were to marketing back then. I guarantee you, nobody who actively argued about how many bits their console was even knew what bits were. Hell, I don't even know, and I'm complaining about it. All people knew was the higher the number, the gooder the fun. And Nintendo wanted to flaunt just how powerful their system was by lodging a number that meant absolutely nothing to anybody prior to their console's name. But they just couldn't help themselves and threw an Ultra in there as well. A couple months later in '94, the console design was revealed. And it's functional. I have no idea what this looks like with its little feet and hourglass figure. The cartridge designs were also shown off here, with the most prominent feature being the fact they exist. This, right here, may have been one of Nintendo's biggest mistakes. By 1994, it was pretty obvious that CDs were the future of video games. They could store so much content, video and audio clips at great quality, and they were so cheap to produce. The Ultra 64 cartridges could barely hold anything in comparison, could barely hold video and audio clips, and if they could, they were severely compressed and downgraded and cost a mortgage to produce. But they were harder to pirate and had faster load times. That makes them better. And ever since that decision, Nintendo's always been number 1, 2, 3, 1, Wii U. The Ultra 64 was consistently talked about for years, with a release by holiday 1995 planned. Eventually, they renamed it to just straight up Nintendo 64, which, yeah, Nintendo Ultra 64, you only really need one of those. But even with the name and console design finalized, Nintendo delayed the system a good handful of times until finally nailing a release in June 1996 in Japan, September 1996 in North America, and March 1997 everywhere else. 4 years after it was announced. Yeah, this console took a while to actually exist. And that was unfortunate because Sega and Sony had a 2-year head start. Their consoles released in 1994, but they weren't Nintendo, they were dog. Nintendo was fine with delaying their console and choosing to only use cartridges because they felt that people would choose to wait for an N64 instead of just buying a PlayStation. They sure didn't. To be fair, the Nintendo 64 sold incredibly well throughout its launch window, doing better than the competition for a brief moment. But then, it happened. Nothing. The Nintendo 64 had numerous software droughts. Nintendo just couldn't pump games out fast enough for the system. Games were becoming harder to develop. This was the first generation where 3D was the norm, so it was understandable development times may have been longer. But see, that's where the other developers come in. When Nintendo's not releasing games, surely the third parties can fill the void. And we return to one of Nintendo's greatest mistakes. See, the Sega Saturn and PlayStation may have only been stinky-ass 32-bit systems, but they used CDs for their games. That meant the games would cost less and store far more information. And with these systems having a 2-year head start on the N64, developers got used to having all that leg room. A standard PlayStation disc could fit roughly 700 megabytes of all kinds of stuff. A Nintendo 64 cartridge, at the most, could fit 64 megabytes. And even then, a game that used a 64 megabyte cartridge cost your soul to buy. So, to third-party developers, would you rather develop for a system that's been out for 2 years with a good install base that uses CDs so you can make bigger games with not as many limitations, or would you rather with Mario? Not only was Nintendo's output of software a bit lower than usual, but the amount of third-party software was just not up to snuff with the competition. When Nintendo wasn't releasing a new game, there really wasn't anything else to play. But I mean, when there was stuff to play, there was stuff to play. People loved their N64s, and while the PlayStation sold over 100 million units, with the Nintendo 64 coming in a distant second place with 32 million, it did better than the Sega Saturn. But that's something everybody can say about themselves. I think the lack of third-party support in some way made it so the people who owned a 64 felt a deeper connection to it than the PS1. That console kind of felt like the console people would just buy by default. Yeah, it has the most games, it plays music CDs, I'll go with this one. If you wanted an N64, you wanted an N64. You were willing to look past the issues because you really wanted to play the games. I just always see more people passionately talking about the Nintendo 64 in comparison to the PS1. While these are both two systems beloved by many, I feel like if you take 10 different people who owned a PlayStation, each of them probably don't have a ton in common. There were so many games on that system, there's a chance everybody played different PS1 games growing up. If you take 10 N64 owners, they all played Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye, Ocarina of Time. Not saying that's a good or bad thing, but I feel like the lack of a ton of software on Nintendo 64 in some ways helped bring more Nintendo fans together. That's almost the weirdly beautiful thing about a console that didn't do that well. The Wii U era was pretty tart, but I felt there was this cool connection I had with other Wii U owners. It was called a mutual hatred. So this is the Nintendo 64, originally launching for $199 with no pack-in game initially. Thank God, I'm allergic to deals. It was pretty much tradition for Nintendo to include a game with the console up to this point, but they decided to forgo that with the N64. Again, comparing the PS1 to the system, PlayStation just comes out on top here. You buy an N64 with no game, it's completely worthless out of the box. At least with the PlayStation, you could play music CDs on it, which gave it some value without a game. What are you gonna do with an N64? Take it for a walk? The system itself was standardized across the world. The name and design were the same in all regions, so we all said at the same time, what the f is this? This is such a silly looking console. It doesn't look bad by any means, it's just kinda odd. But it's not full-blown odd, it looks basic and strange at the same time. However, this design gave way to some incredible colors and special editions. There were so many variants out there. This is one of the first big consoles to really push different colors. But of course, the charcoal color was the de facto, coming with a great spider? Oh look, it's time to be confused about the Nintendo 64 controller. What the hell? Of course, with the system being so focused on delivering three-dimensional experiences, a simple 8-way directional pad wasn't gonna do. We needed full 360-degree movement, so here's an old friend I wouldn't trust with my life. The analog stick, a tiny little joystick made for one thumb in all the directions in the world. Outside of this edition, most of the controller is fairly typical. The buttons and D-pad all feel fine, and while the layout is odd, it's functional. 3 grips is just flat out bizarre though. There's no right or wrong way to hold this thing, though there's really no Nintendo 64 game out there that would ask you to use the D-pad if you're already using the stick and A and B buttons. For 3D games, you hold the middle prong and right prong. For 2D games, left prong and right prong. For weird-ass games, left prong and middle prong. There's a trigger on the back of the middle prong here, these new C buttons, and a port for all kinds of activities. It's not a terrible controller. It's just not great. The stick is sort of garbage feeling, and sure, no game asks you to have access to all these buttons at once, but isn't it weird that this controller makes sure you can't access all these buttons at once? Like, is there any good reason why if you design your game around using the analog stick and A and B buttons, you just can't use the D-pad or L button? Regardless of my problems with it, the Nintendo 64 controller deserves respect after a shunning, but incorporating the analog stick helped innovate games so hard, and we can't ignore the fact you could use 4 of them on a console, no problem. 4-player multiplayer. That was another one of the Nintendo 64's claims to fame. Most consoles will only have 2 controller ports, and you would have to grab an accessory to up it to 4. Because of that, not many games in general supported more than 2 players, but the N64 really pushed for more people playing at once. It was the only console that generation to have 4 controller ports, which really helped it stick out. And just like the console controllers came in so many fun colors. Do I like this thing or not? Well, we gotta move on to the games, and Nintendo, the least you could have done when moving strictly to cartridges for this system was give them labels. I had to resort to buying fan-made ones on Etsy, and they're pretty fun. It makes it exciting when you buy a new 64 game, like, oh, I get to use another sticker. Even with the labels, the way these things are shaped make them kind of a pain to store. Anyways, the Nintendo 64 launched with games here in North America, and 2 of them at that. Japan had it way better. They got 3 games. Alongside the system's release, Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wing 64 came out, that was it. If you were living in Japan, you had the choice of buying Saikyo Habu Shogi as well, which meant you were either buying Mario 64 or Pilot Wings. Super Mario 64 was the flagship title, the reason you wanted to buy a Nintendo 64 if Pilot Wings was sold out. Popping this cartridge in and turning it on.
It's me, Mario. Hello.
Oh my god, he has a face? This right here helped show just how powerful the Nintendo 64 was, and this isn't even the game. Mario's smooth facial animations, the high quality model, being able to manipulate his face to be whatever you want, this was an ingenious title screen, and it's completely superfluous. It has nothing to do with the rest of the game. But it's here to show something that could not have been done on prior hardware, and it's just for fun. The game itself, I mean, what else is there to say? I mean, it's no Pilot Wing 64, but it has its charm. Mario 64 may just be one of the greatest launch titles in history, not only showing why the N64 mattered, but what video games could be.
Pizza Hut stuffed crust is the crust that made crust good. Topped and stuffed with over a half-pound of cheese. What are you so afraid of? Loving it? Original stuffed crust, just $12.99. Only from Pizza Hut. No one out-pizzas the Hut.
Freeze drive ritual!
What's the recipe for surprising the kids, treating yourself, and ditching dish duty? You're looking at it. Order your Pizza Hut faves like original pan, original stuffed crust, and more at pizzahut.com. No one out-pizzas the Hut.
These are the employees' cars.
You can do whatever you want to something if it's on your property.
Legally speaking, that's not...
Let's go make a car.
What are you doing to my car?
Stealing your hubcaps. It's fine. I'm the new CEO.
American Auto, January 4th on NBC. And watch 2 episodes now on Peacock.
3D gaming was nothing new by the time this thing finally came out, but Mario 64 was the first to truly nail it. Having this controllable camera system and these wide open worlds to explore and jump around in. Half the fun in Mario 64 is just running, jumping, doing whatever. Wasting time. Some of my favorite memories with this game had nothing to do with completing the objectives. It was exploring Peach's castle, both on the outside and the inside. It was falling into a new level and just jumping about, doing all these fun tricks. This was the perfect selling point for 3D gaming, showing how it wasn't a gimmick. It wasn't about graphics, it wasn't about just looking more and more realistic. 3D worlds are so much more immersive, and the kind of fun I have in Mario 64, just rolling around exploring, it couldn't be done in 2D. While there were objectives to complete and the actual game was incredibly fun and replayable, Mario 64 gave you the tools to make your own fun alongside it. As a kid, it was a blast using my imagination with this game, coming up with crazy things to do or just not do anything at all, just enjoying being in this world. This will always be one of the greatest video games of all time. One of. Pilot Wings 64, a sequel to Pilot Wings, a launch title for the Super Nintendo. You know, it made sense to make this a launch title for the 64, as the original Pilot Wings was showing how the SNES could sorta kinda do pseudo 3D stuff. Now with 64, we have the real deal. There's not a ton to this one, different missions to complete with different flight vehicles. It's fairly basic, but a lot of the fun comes from just flying around. It's enjoyable to just hover over these environments, and just like with Mario 64, it's fun to stray from the core objective and make your own fun. This launch was very quality over quantity oriented, which I guess was Nintendo's mentality throughout the 64's life. Less than 300 games were released here in North America, with less than 400 overall worldwide. That's still a decent number of games, but comparing that to pretty much any other major console, it's like, man, what's going on here? Nintendo consistently had issues with game output, delaying games quite a bit, especially in 1997. Look at this lineup. These were the only games Nintendo published for the 64 in 1997. None of these are bad games, but when Tetrisphere is 17% of your game output, something's and when we take a look at what Sony was publishing on the PlayStation in 97, yeah, issue alert. But when Nintendo released a good game, they released a good game. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was what many people were looking forward to, and it was basically another Mario 64 in terms of impact. Gone was the top-down perspective of 2D Zelda, and in came a third-person viewpoint in a 3D world. The added dimension really helped to push the character, story, and universe of Ocarina of Time. It truly felt like you were on an adventure, and these characters were actual people. Ocarina revolutionized what adventure games were and is still considered one of, if not the greatest game of all time. We're 3 for 3 here. Not only did we get one Zelda game, but 2 Zelda games for the system. Crazy considering not many games came out on the N64, but we ended up getting 2 games in a series notorious for long wait times between entries. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was a very smart sequel, reusing assets in the foundation of Ocarina of Time and making something fairly unique in comparison. Doomsday is inevitable, and you have to do your general Zelda stuff before the time limit runs up, but you can manipulate time to your advantage. This, alongside the far darker tone, is what makes this game really stand out. Majora did require the expansion pack though, an accessory for the people who care too much. See, there's this door on the console, we remove it, and oh man, how could I forget to mention the jumper pack, my favorite! This comes standard with the console, and you need it inserted to have anything work, but we can remove it and replace it with an expansion pack for maximum better? Only 2 games straight up required it, as it gave the N64 more RAM to work with, Majora's Mask and Donkey Kong 64. Perfect Dark sorta needed it, but you could kinda play some parts of it without an expansion pack. A handful of games supported the accessory, but it was not required by any means for most. Hell, Donkey Kong 64 barely even required it. The only reason it needed it was to fix a game-breaking bug the developers had no idea how to fix otherwise. The only solution was to make the expansion pack mandatory, so it was bundled in with the game. This is a bloated mess of a game. I mean, overall it's alright, but man, there are just too many collectibles. But hey, Donkey Kong in 3D, that's pretty neat. It was cool seeing these characters and worlds from a brand new perspective. And we have none other than Rare to thank for that, one of the definitive developers of the Nintendo 64. Sure, they worked on the Donkey Kong Country games, but the N64 was where they really hit their stride. I have no idea how they were able to pump out so many good games in such a small amount of time. Like, 3 of the 6 Nintendo 64 games Nintendo published in 1997 were developed by Rare. While they weren't owned by Nintendo, they had a strong partnership with them at this time, leading to games like Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, 3D platformers not unlike Mario 64, but with their own flavor and spin. Conker's Bad Fur Day, a 3D platformer definitely unlike Mario 64, playing around with the concept of looking like a cutesy family-friendly family-friendly game when in reality being not a church. And my god, they really knew how to use this hardware. Conquer specifically included just a ton of voice acting and cutscenes, which was hard to do on this system. You have some quirky one-offs like Blast Corps, all about vandalism, Jet Force Gemini, Mickey Speedway USA, Killer Instinct Gold, oh my god. Sure, not all these games were 100% winners, but at the very least, they were fairly quality titles for the time. But then they decided to squirt out GoldenEye 007, a landmark game in history, where 4 for 4. How the hell did this even happen? A movie licensed game that came out 2 years after the movie ended up being a landmark title on home consoles, revolutionizing the first-person shooter, including one of the most cherished multiplayer modes of all time. It's definitely hard to go back to now, but you can always appreciate what it did for gaming and how amazing this was back in '97. Somehow, Nintendo had the James Bond license for video games at the time, and they definitely made the most of it. They made 2 games, but one of them was GoldenEye. When the license went to Electronic Arts, Rare wanted to make a spiritual successor to GoldenEye, and ended up both developing and publishing Perfect Dark in 2000. Again, similar to GoldenEye, I winced at the thought of going back to it today, but back then, yeah, this was good and stuff. It pretty much used every aspect of the N64 it could have, included the transfer pack accessory. You plug this into the controller and you can pop certain Game Boy and Game Boy Color games in to have home console and handheld games interact. I love stupid junk like this. Not a ton of games supported it, but the one game that mattered did. Pokemon Stadium. The Nintendo 64 released during the big Pokemon boom when the craze just started to happen worldwide. So Nintendo acted upon that. They had crazy successful Pokemon games on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Let's make some Nintendo 64 Pokemon spin-offs. Yeah, Pokemon Stadium is like taking a standard Pokemon game with the adventure and battles, putting it in 3D and taking out the adventure. You're just left with the battles with not much substance. Of course, back then, that was pretty cool to see your favorite Pokemon in 3D, just like how it was cool for me to see my favorite Donkey Kong. And you could transfer your very own Pokemon from the Game Boy games into Stadium, plus play the Game Boy games on the TV with the transfer pack. You couldn't really play any other Game Boy games on the TV with the N64. Just Pokemon. See, Nintendo let you play any Game Boy game on your Super Nintendo with the Super Game Boy. Why they made an accessory like this that let you only play one Game Boy game and nothing else, I don't know. But all Pokemon Stadium games supported the transfer pack. Pokemon Stadium 1, which only released in Japan. Pokemon Stadium 1, which is Pokemon Stadium 2 in Japan. And Pokemon Stadium 2, which was Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver in Japan. Never liked Logic. There was AU Pikachu, which used the voice recognition unit, don't you? It doesn't. Pokemon Puzzle League, which was just a Pokemon-themed version of Tetris Attack, which makes it my favorite Pokemon game. And Pokemon Snap, an on-rails photography game. Try to get as good Pokemon shots as possible. This was the best non-puzzle Pokemon game on the system. I understand that the developers behind Pokemon strongly believed that the Game Boy was the best platform for the series at the time, but I'm just surprised Nintendo didn't straight up force them to make a true N64 Pokemon adventure. That really would have been the kick in the pants the system needed. But I mean, it still had some of the best-selling games that generation. Mario Kart 64 came out a few months after the system's launch, and this is the big one. Easily one of my favorite Mario Karts nostalgia-wise. I don't know what it was, but my memories of this game are better than any other game in the series. The tracks, the multiplayer, the items, the battle mode, it was all the best. Playing it now? It's fine. I mean, playing with friends, any Mario Kart's gonna be a blast, but just looking at the core game, the core controls, it's not as good as I remember. At least we have Diddy Kong Racing. This was the big holiday title for 1997. When Mario Kart released earlier that year, yeah, that was really needed. But in many ways, this is better than Mario Kart 64. The characters are actual full 3D models, while in Mario Kart, they're all flat. There's an adventure mode, bosses, more characters developed by Rare. Again, how did they do this? Like 3 months after GoldenEye! And there were so many other racing games. F-Zero X, sequel to the SNES launch title. You know, with that one, you had to take their word for it where you were and truly how fast you were going. Here, you get the full F-Zero experience. It is blisteringly fast. Wave Race 64 and 1080 snowboarding, the extreme sports racing games by Nintendo, but loads of fun, and they even brought back Excite Bike with Excite Bike 64. Of course, these racing games may not have been the most deep experiences out there in comparison to games like Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid on the PS1, but they were fun multiplayer experiences, and that is what made the N64 stand out. So many of Nintendo's flagship games on this console were multiplayer oriented, even if they hailed from a series that used to be single player only. F-Zero X introduced multiplayer, and so did Star Fox 64. And Star Fox 64 was a huge release, basically acting as a retelling of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, but now on a system that isn't choking on its graphics. And the initial release included the Rumble Pack. Now, this is big. Plug it into your controller, pop some batteries in, and what happens in the game affects your controller. It really added to the experience and made big moments feel that much bigger. I'm surprised Nintendo never updated the N64 controller to have the Rumble feature built in. So many games supported it, way more than any other 64 accessory. except the memory cards, but even then most of the games I cared about just saved directly to the cartridge, so oops, I don't own one. Yeah, I have a will to live but not a 64 memory card, something's not right. Anyways, yeah, multiplayer was a big part of the Nintendo 64's identity. I immediately think of party games instead of huge sprawling adventures when the console comes up. And to be fair, I think we can credit it with the birth of the modern party genre. Mario Party was introduced on this console and appeared 3 times. A virtual board game where mini games are played after everybody takes a turn moving, fun occurs, inevitable. Listen, I can go on and on about these games, and well, yes, they are the most balanced, they are the most well thought out, amazing games out there. They're super fun with friends, so much garbage happens. These are great, kick back on the couch, have pay attention kind of games. But when it's time to take them seriously, it's time to really take them seriously. While I think Mario Party 2 is the most well-rounded of the 3, I have a soft spot for the first one. Literally. There are multiple mini-games in the first entry that require spinning the analog stick, and the most effective way to do so is to use your palm. Why wouldn't Nintendo get sued? So, if you complained for a brief time, Nintendo would send you gloves free of charge and quickly put out Mario Party 2 with less hand-altering action to avoid further action. But hey, if you wanted something a bit more traditional, Mario sports games started to make their mark on the 64. They were always a thing, but truly became their own here. Golf and tennis were great entries, and they even supported the transfer pack, communicating with the Game Boy Color versions. And then Dr. Mario 64 came out, and it was the last Nintendo published N64 game here in North America, and you'd think they'd put a lot of time and effort into it. This is just Dr. Mario. I mean, it has 4 players, which is cool, but for the last Nintendo 64 game made by Nintendo a few months before the GameCube was releasing, I don't know, this looks kind of stinky. Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards was another late N64 release, and it looks really impressive. It's still a 2D game, but with consistently changing camera angles. The colors and models look so nice, and plus you can inhale an enemy, obtain their power, and mix and match it with another enemy's power. It's cool, alright, moving on. Even though Kirby was a 2D platformer, there wasn't a ton of them on here. Sure, there was Yoshi's Story, a successor to Yoshi's Island. Not as good, but an interesting follow-up. Most games were just straight up 3D, which, obviously, why wouldn't they be? That was half the appeal of the system. Games were in 3D now. But looking over at the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, they knew 2D games still had appeal. They weren't worse than 3D games, they were just different. So those systems had a pretty good mix of 2D and 3D games, while the 64 primarily focused on just 3D. That isn't terrible or anything. I mean, there were still 2D games here, with one of the most prominent being yes, the first entry in the Nintendo crossover fighting series. Super Smash Bros. Appeared on the Nintendo 64. Look at this is adorably tiny. Who would have thought this game featuring 12 Nintendo characters would kaboom into this? 4-player mayhem, a cross between a fighting game and a party game. This is the Nintendo 64 doing what it does best. Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time may be some of the best games out there, but Smash Bros. Is really what the Nintendo 64 was at its core. The fun machine. They had Paper Mario too. But that's pretty much everything Nintendo made on the system. Sure, there were some Japan exclusives. Animal Crossing got its start here. Like super late, it came out a week after Dr. Mario 64 and was the last overall Nintendo published game on the system, but it happened. Sin and Punishment and Custom Robo appeared only in Japan, but that's pretty much it.
These are the employees' cars.
You can do whatever you want to something if it's on your property.
Legally speaking, that's not.
Let's go make a car.
What are you doing to my car?
Stealing your hubcaps. It's fine. I'm the new CEO.
American Auto, January 4th on NBC, and watch 2 episodes now on Peacock.
I think it's time to discuss not what appeared on the Nintendo 64, but what didn't appear. No Metroid game, no Fire Emblem game, that was a little odd. Third-party support was incredibly minimal. Sure, the system got a few games here and there, but Squaresoft, the makers of Final Fantasy, they originally were planning to support the system just like any of Nintendo's previous consoles, but decided to go with PlayStation because of those sweet discs. They didn't publish anything on Nintendo 64. And then the other big guys, Capcom, Konami, they made a few things, but not nearly as much as they did on PlayStation. Sometimes the 64 would get table scraps from the PS1, like Mega Man 64. It's just Mega Man Legends from the PS1, a spin-off adventure game. Why not just call it Mega Man Legends? Calling it Mega Man 64 implies this is the definitive Mega Man Nintendo 64 experience, not a port of a PS1 adventure game spin-off of a platforming series. Also, let's discuss the 64 name. My god, why did every other game have to have 64 in their title? It just wasn't consistent. Why did Mario get it but not Zelda? Why did Donkey Kong get it but not F-Zero? Why did Mario Kart get it but not Mario Tennis? Pilotwings but not Yoshi? It was just weird what Nintendo considered deserving of an actual subtitle and what wasn't deserving. It almost felt like they were saying, yeah, this is just the Nintendo 64 version of the series and nothing more, keep walking. And a lot of other companies outside of Nintendo did this, and in my opinion, it made things somewhat confusing. Like Mega Man 64 is a port of a PS1 game not called that, but Doom 64 is a completely brand new original game. At that point, why not call Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64 Resident Evil 64? This was another Capcom game, the second one of 3, the third being Magical Tetris Challenge. This is all they did on N64. But Resident Evil 2 is wildly impressive. This was a 2-disc PS1 game, and they crammed the whole thing on a cartridge with not nearly as many compromises as you'd expect. This is crazy. It's unfortunate not a lot of other games like this reported, but to be fair, this was a miracle that happened in the first place. Konami was more prominent on the system, though that's really only because they were publishing a lot of sports games at the time. They made 2 unique 3D Castlevanias, I don't like them. I mean, they made Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn in Japan. This was a refined 2D experience. The Castlevania 64 games are wet and muddy and just feel so lonely and not fun, and I'm sad. Nintendo 64 games in general just don't look that great. They look so muddy and blurry if you're playing on an original console. Playing anywhere else, like on the Wii Virtual Console or something, they're a bit cleaner, but still, this era just doesn't age very well at all. The N64 didn't get a lot of other games. Third parties primarily would port over family games, sports games, some 3D platformers. Every now and then some exclusives would appear, like the Turok series, but there were barely any RPGs. Now, for somebody like me, thank God! Oh, come on. Basically, there were only 3 RPGs on the entire system. Quest 64, which the only reason this game exists was to be one of the only RPGs on the system, Ogre Battle 64, and Paper Mario. This was mainly a 3D platforming adventure game and party game machine. It did those things very well, but it wasn't a great all-in-one console. Which, to fix that issue, Nintendo released the 64DD add-on, I think. This was announced before the system even came out. Great, an add-on for a system that's not even close to releasing. I'm so excited to buy 2 things. This is actually just straight up called the 64DD, not the Nintendo 64DD, and these are incredibly rare and expensive.
You'd have to be a an idiot to own one of them.
While it was announced in 1995, it released in 1999. It was created to avoid the storage limitations of the N64 cartridges by using magnetic discs. It barely helped. Like, N64 cartridges at their max could store 64 megabytes of stuff. These discs were 64 megabytes standard. Like, CDs were around 700 megabytes. Why even try to release this? It could do all kinds of things. It had an internal clock. It could connect online. It failed miserably. Only a couple games released for the thing. It only came out in Japan, sold like ass, was delayed several times, and by the time it came out, it was worthless. The Sega Dreamcast already released. The PlayStation 2 was announced. I feel like Nintendo wasted so much of their time with this thing. Dozens upon dozens of games were planned for the DD, eventually getting canceled. Without it, I'm sure we would have gotten way more N64 games. All these games that were being worked on for the 64 DD, they ended up saying, well, let's either turn them into N64 cartridge games or wait to release them on better hardware. And that just left the Nintendo 64 with Dr. Mario 64 being the last game Nintendo made for the system. What a way to piss out.
Yeah, I think this deserves a discussion on its own. If I ever own one.
But that was the Nintendo 64, and overall, it's a pretty good system. Though, no matter how I look at it, I'm always going to see a troubled console that didn't live up to what Nintendo wanted out of it. For every one thing Nintendo innovated with this console, there was another that was ridiculously close-minded and stuck in the past. And while I respect it for being such a landmark console with such amazing games like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, I just feel like out of the 400 so games that released for it, there's only like 40 of them that are well worth playing today, and only 20 of those 40 have aged well. But the good games for the system were really good games. It nailed multiplayer, and no matter what, there will always be a reason to fire this system back up. It may not be my favorite Nintendo system, but I care about it.
I found it!
Hey y'all, Scott here, and you might have noticed this 2-liter Mountain Dew and sack of Doritos I'm about to fling into my gullet. Don't worry, I feel a good reason for doing this coming on to me. That'll work. Not only do I want to become a true enjoyer of all things video game, but I also want an excuse to go to this hospital near me. They're really cool. They got a vending machine and everything.
Oh my god, this room is crazy. My arteries.
You ever play Pac-Man World 2 and you're like, man, I could use a choking hazard right about now. Food has been associated with gaming here and there. You see, with every new Call of Duty or Halo release comes a corresponding can of Mountain Dew. Every new console release comes with oodles of sweepstakes plastered on boxes of Special K. And of course, many people like to just glutton out and stuff their face while playing a game. So let's take a look at some food associated with games. Basically, I went to the supermarket and loaded my cart up with anything video game related. Let's move over to this room. Yeah, you see, this is what us kitchen owners refer to as kitchen. Blam, let's get this one out of the way. Super Mario cereal took the world by storm. It's been a pretty boring few months. Released to promote Super Mario Odyssey, Super Mario cereal is a Kellogg's production and includes power-up mushrooms. Well, you know I had to buy it. The box doubles as an amiibo you can scan into Mario Odyssey for some small bonuses, nothing special, but still a really cool touch. Also on the back, we have some activities for you to tackle during unemployment. Enough gawking, let's crack this thing open and get to the goods. Super Mario cereal's flavor is mixed berry and marshmallows. The mixed berry is contained in these stars, and the marshmallows take the form of these question mark blocks and mushrooms, or as I like to call them, and what? After going knee deep into this cereal, I think it's alright. I don't think mixed berry is the best flavor to combine with marshmallows, but what do I know? I don't cereal for a living. If you're a kid who's begged their mom to grab Super Mario cereal at the supermarket, you're no doubt familiar with getting grape nuts instead. Around the same time Super Mario cereal released, Post cereals featured a Nintendo Switch and Mario Odyssey sweepstakes on the front of various boxes, like Honey Bunches of Oats and, of course, grape nuts. You gotta hand it to the sweepstakes. It got me to try an edible form of torture. This isn't the first time Nintendo's been plastered on cereal boxes. Back in the late 80s, the Nintendo cereal system was a thing. It was of course promoting the Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Mario Bros., and The Legend of Zelda. 2 cereals in one! 2 slender bags of a Mario and a Zelda cereal were inside. Good for them. Now if you need to be up and about harder than ever, you might want to contact a physician / pick up some gaming related energy drinks. There's loads of these things out there. Here I just have Mega Man and Sonic branded ones. The Mega Man energy drink is called the E-Tang, which is cute, and the Sonic one is just called Speed. What is going on with Sonic's legs here? Like, yeah, Sonic usually runs so fast his legs are nothing more than a figure 8 or something, but there's that, and then there's having no legs with just scribbles below you. Giving the drinks a taste, I mean, they're energy drinks, that's for sure. And I'm pretty sure both of these are the exact same drinks. If you're into these sort of things, they're probably okay. Now, if you remove the drink from the colorful can, pop it in a standard glass, and say to me you just drank Mega Man's E-Tank, that's another story. Oh god, this is inside me. It's weird, when I drank this, I thought to myself, wow, this tastes blue. It's probably the fact these were Mega Man and Sonic drinks, but after further inspection, that is not blue. Here's some of these retro candy tins, products that will make any 30-something squee in a Target. These things have been around for a while and are just small candies inside a tin that's designed like something from yesteryear. I found a bunch of Mario and Nintendo related ones with one Pac-Man arcade cabinet thrown in there. There's one that I always wanted but never found, which was an Atari 2600 joystick tin containing gum. The joystick was rubber and everything. But whatever, we have an NES controller instead. No clue why this specifically has the Nintendo Power logo on it, but who cares? I do, these mints are pathetic. These aren't the virgin mints I was promised, these are just lame circles. What's so Nintendo Power about these? It doesn't even taste like Nintendo Power, these mints are weak. Same goes for the Mario mints as well. This is probably the lamest of all the tin designs I picked up. It's literally just a rectangle with a Mario sprite on it. The mints are blocks, which could be interpreted as the blocks in Mario games, and I don't know, I think they just found a generic design and said, That'll work. This Link tin is at least shaped like the Sprite, which is cool. Inside we have Orange Sword Sours. Yeah, I have a feeling this was just a repackaging of some Christian candy. The Pac-Man arcade cabinet aesthetically reigns supreme over most of these. The top is on the bottom. Nice. It's these little Pac-Man shaped candies that to this day I still can't figure out what flavor they're supposed to be. In fact, most of these candies don't have a lot of flavor at all, to be honest. You get these things for the tin, plain and simple. If you say your favorite food is coin candies, well, the door is that way. If you're not into the tins, we can always shift gears to other types of candies. Pez dispensers are wacky plastic heads that feed you on command. But we still have to load the candies into Donkey Kong here. Keep WikiHow on standby. And here we are, nice and simple. Fun, fun, fun. The Wonder Ball, the first instance of the term fine dining. It's a chocolate ball with so many goodies inside. This is a crazy great deal. We get stickers, a coin, and a chocolate ball with fruity candies on the inside. This is crazy. Finally, a Luigi fan. With candy at the bottom. A Luigi fan.
Pizza Hut stuffed crust is the crust that made crust good. Topped and stuffed with over a half pound of cheese. What are you so afraid of? Loving it? Original stuffed crust, just $12.99. Only from Pizza Hut. No one out Pizza the Hut.
If you really want to win this, we should do the
Freeze drive ritual! Silence! TBH, the elixir!
Elixir? I brought Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper is the elixir.
What's the recipe for surprising the kids, treating yourself, and ditching dish duty? You're looking at it. Order your Pizza Hut faves like original pan, original stuffed crust, and more at pizzahut.com. No one out-pizzas the Hut.
So many people have asked me to cover Pokemon, so I guess this is the best place to start. Pokemon Fruit Snacks. Oh, so this is what the franchise is all about. We have loads of fruity interpretations of everybody's favorite Pokemon, like Dopey, Sneezy, Bashful, the gang's all here. Overall, good first impressions of the franchise. There's also a Mario Kart variety, which isn't as Mario Kart as it is just standard Mario. But finally, we get to know, what does Luigi taste like? Now let's talk some more video game promotions. Food that's packaging is just absolutely creamed out by a hot new video game release. I think one of the most notable ones would be Mountain Dew and Game Fuel, a specific flavor of Mountain Dew that releases to coincide with a new video game release. This is actually the first release of the drink, promoting Halo 3 and congestive heart failure. 3 free Pokemon cards and a box of fruit roll-ups, let's go for it! Oh man, anybody up for 52 pickup? You get a free Sea of Thieves item per Chips Ahoy pack? Well, don't mind if I do. Now, one piece of gaming food I could not for the life of me track down was Gamer Grub. This stuff always looked pretty tasty. It's fundamentally just a snack mix that was advertised as the perfect gaming snack because you can just pour pour it down your throat. No messy hands, no messy controllers. It came in a few varieties, PB&J, s'mores, pizza, barbecue, but I believe they've stopped making it. And who could forget the classic Sonic the Hedgehog ice cream bar? I believe these were primarily only sold via ice cream trucks, and man, was it a hard-hitting feeling of regret to buy this instead of something actually edible. I mean, it was always fine, but nothing amazing. The eyes were gumballs, exactly what I want after a munch session of a frozen dairy treat. Finally, Campbell's Super Mario Soup. Let's pop this bad boy open, cook it up, and try it out. You know what? That's actually pretty good. Let me check the ingredients on this bad boy. Oh, hell yeah.
Is that a pinball machine? Oh my god, my ass is bleeding.
Hey y'all, Scott here, and damn it! I own Sonic Jam! It's a pretty rare game, but I don't want to be known as the guy who owns Sonic Jam when I'm dead. If you tell somebody you collect video games, you are most definitely going to get the question, what's the rarest game you own? Come back to me on that one. I firmly believe if you want to collect stuff and have fun while doing it, it's best to do it with things you legitimately enjoy and not just collect it because, ooh, it's worth something. I collect the games I want to collect and play eventually. The rarity or value hardly matters to me. However, it is still fairly interesting to know. I mean, I bought Gravity Rush Remastered because I wanted it, but hey, now that it's $70, I guess this is my personality now. But that's beside the point. There aren't infinite copies of all video games available. I know it feels like there's a Connected Ventures every few inches, but I guarantee you there's a finite amount. Some video games are as common as leaves, but then there are the video games that just never sold that well or just never had a ton of copies produced. Now, a game can be rare right from the get-go, but mostly the value increases over time as more and more people realize, oh god, that's a rare game, I want that. But let's lay this out right here. Rare games aren't always valuable, and valuable games aren't always rare. A game's value comes down to how many people want it and how many people are willing to pay a hefty price for it. I can make a house out of all the Mario Party 2s out in the world, but a lot of people really want that game right now, so it costs nearly as much as a new game. But it ain't rare, that's for sure. But then you have whatever the hell this is. A pre-owned copy of Madden 93 for the Sega Genesis, complete with a specific cardboard box for pre-owned games. I guarantee you this is far more rare than Mario Party 2, but you won't see anybody breaking down my door for this. Maybe. Technically, any copy of any game can be slightly altered to become the rarest version of that game. See? Here? Look. One of a kind. The only thing that'll make this valuable is if somebody is willing to pay $300 for it. Everybody's obsessed with the rarest games of all time, owning the rarest games of all time, playing the rarest games of all time. As long as they're worth something. Now I'm only interested in picking up rare games that I want to play really bad, but I'm willing to make an exception for the sake of investing. I want to find the rarest game of all time to help me pay off some fun debt. Well, what do I constitute as a rare game? Well, something that's uncommon, of course. I think the only rare games that get attention are the ones that sell for ridiculous amounts of money. You couldn't pay me to pay this much. It doesn't help that a lot of articles go up detailing old vintage things you might have in your attic that might be worth a fortune. Yeah, an original Game Boy is rare. It's like $700. Yeah, okay, no. I mean, all you have to do to feel better about owning something is to search for it on eBay and sort the listing from highest price first. I'll think about it. I remember when a bunch of people thought they totally scored after a bunch of articles appeared online saying the VHS tapes of old Disney movies were selling for That's not the case. That's how much some sellers are asking for these things. Are people buying for that much? I hope not. The value of rare items is only as much as people are willing to spend on them. In my opinion, no game is worth more than the original asking price of it, and even then, Sushi Striker retail for $50, my god. A pretty surefire way to know the true value of a game isn't to go on eBay and say, welp. It's to go on price starting websites. These track how much games sold for over time, so you know the average going price of these things. But if I'm gonna pay top dollar for a game, it may as well be the rarest of all time. But hey, who knows? Let's look through my collection and see if I already own rare games. Well, this is it. These are the elusive games in my collection. I own a lot of heavily desired games that go for a lot of money, but these ain't rare. Like, I own a copy of Shenmue, please like me. I own a copy of Sonic Jam on the Sega Saturn. That's right. This is probably the rarest game I have. I mean, I have Gravity Rush Remastered, a few uncommon Wii U titles, Chibi Robo, Retro Game Challenge, Xenoblade Chronicles, nothing that crazy. I have Metal Slug Anthology for the PlayStation 2. This was a fairly uncommon game for that system for a while there. I found it for $60 and I scooped it up. The value now is, oh, son of a bitch. I find the value of games to fluctuate like crazy over time. It generally has to do with what's the big nostalgia craze and what's not easily accessible. For that reason, GameCube is fairly expensive now, while a lot of the value of older consoles around the NES era aren't necessarily shooting up in value. The big nostalgia boom for that thing was around 2010, but now it's Chibi Robo's time to shine. Look at that. But we're not just looking for expensive games, we're looking for something that's one of a kind, the rarest of all games. Well, we're not really gonna find much in terms of the more modern consoles. The older the system gets, the harder it is to find stuff for it, and thus the rarer and more expensive some games get. Now, we do have a ton of companies that specialize in limited releases for games recently, but they usually produce a few thousand copies of games. That's just not rare enough. Who knows, I mean, these things might skyrocket in value in 10 years, but for now, get out of my face, Night Trap. 5,000 copies, big whoop. I feel like one of the most likely candidates for an intentionally rare game that's going to skyrocket in value is Axiom Verge on Wii U. Only 5,000 copies on a system nobody's heard of. It's like I'm owning a ticking time bomb of profit. There is that game for the PlayStation 4 that I refuse to say because I'll die laughing. This had a similar limited release strategy with only around 1,000 copies produced. However, the company that sold it was run by one guy who ripped off the Limited Run Games logo, sold the game on April Fool's Day on a website that looks like something you should give your credit card to. Many just thought the release was a joke, but it happened. Only around 80 people bought copies, and the 900 or so copies that were left unsold, well, who knows what happened to them. So this takes the reins for the current rarest game of all time. Let me point this away from the door in case anybody walks in. If we go back a generation, games start to get a little more pricey. The PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 don't really have many expensive games outside of collector's editions, but the PlayStation 3 has NBA Elite 11. It was canceled, but some copies were accidentally sold at retailers. Now, how many copies actually exist of this game? If I had to guess, I'd say something in the low triple digits, but who knows. But there we go, we have another candidate for the rarest game of all time. Boom. Nothing on the Wii, DS, or PSP even comes close to this game's rarity, which is why we should go back another generation. Gacha Force is probably the rarest standard GameCube game, and I guarantee that's the sole reason most people own it. There's also NCAA College Basketball 2K3, nowhere near as rare or expensive as Gacha Force or Elite 11, but hey, two rare basketball games, you have to admire that. There's Ninja 5.0 for the Game Boy Advance, which is even more expensive than Gacha Force. The money per square inch is through the roof on this thing. Rule of Rose on the PlayStation 2 and Steel Battalion on Xbox are up there too, but these games all fail the eBay test. If I can go on eBay and find a handful of copies, they aren't rare enough.
Wait a minute.
Hi, thanks for joining the Payne Motors quarterly earnings call. And now I'll turn you over to our new CEO.
The numbers last quarter were rough. Mea culpa. Well, not mea culpa, actually. Vea culpa. Let's sell the crap out of this car.
It looks like the car was assembled by a spider on LSD who also had bad taste.
It tested well.
American Auto premieres January 4th on NBC, and watch 2 episodes now on Peacock.
Now we're starting to get more into the golden age of video game rarities. Information wasn't kept up nearly as well in the past as it is now with video games, so there are a ton more oddities as we go back. Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut on Nintendo 64 is the crowning jewel of that platform, and it's not even good. I'll pay $400! It was a Blockbuster exclusive update to Clay Fighter 63 and a third, and there were around 20,000 copies produced. Well, I don't give a anymore. This is ridiculous. All these rare games have 5,000 plus copies made of them. And the only rarer than rare games we've seen so far are The Death of Society and a basketball game. And I've already played a basketball game within the year. I don't want to do it again. The PlayStation 1 has fairly reasonable prices all around, but none compare to LSD Dream Emulator. Well, no wonder this one's up there. The rarest Game Boy game, definitely Amazing Tater, going for a whopping Game Boy Color had a ton of late system support, even when the Game Boy Advance was alive and well, but easily the rarest of the Game Boy Color games was Shantae, going for a few $100. It's not rare enough! That's why we need to go even further back in history, to the NES. This is the golden age of rare games, the era where information wasn't as easily accessible as it is now. Who knew Kid Clown was gonna be 200 eventually? Tell me. Who? While on the NES, there are the usual suspects. Bubble Bobble Part 2, Panic Restaurant, Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak, and the big one, Little Samson. All of these games are quite good later NES titles. Now, good enough to spend over $300 on, that's tricky to answer. These are kind of the big rare games in the NES library most collectors go for. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're rare, but they're not impossible to get. That's the trick with rare and valuable games. I feel like they're more likely to be in demand when they hit that sweet spot. Incredibly hard to find, but very possible to obtain. You can find all of these on eBay quite frequently, so none of these could really be the rarest games of all time. They're just heavily desired and heavily uncommon. That's why they're so expensive. But let's go a step further with rare NES stuff. How about Bubble Bath Babes? Yes, an unlicensed racy NES puzzle game with babes in a bubble bath. How does gameplay of this get past the YouTube censors? Now, this is definitely more uncommon than any of these, but there's a good few copies lurking around there of Bubble Bath Babes, so surely there's something more elusive and rare than Bubble Bath Babes. Well, I mean, one of the most well-known rare games is the Nintendo World Championship cartridge. The gray version was used in the competition and given to the finalists, while the gold ones are much more limited and were given away via a contest in Nintendo Power. But the thing is, combined, there's still a bit over 100 of these things lurking out there. We're looking for double digits or less over here. Plus, these were never official retail releases, so should they really count? Stadium Events was officially released via retail, but was taken off the store shelves very quickly after Nintendo bought the rights to it and released it as their own game, World Class Track Meet. About 200 copies of Stadium Events are believed to exist, with only up to 20 potentially still being complete in the box. Now, a lot of rare games are only rare in specific regions of the world. Stadium Events is the most rare here in North America. It's still pretty rare in PAL territories, and in Japan, it's $20. Are you serious? Stadium Events may be one of the rarest games ever released via retail for the NES, but it's the same game as World Class Track Meet, so is it really worth getting laid over owning it? Yes. However, if we go back to those darn dang competition cartridges, Nintendo hosted the Nintendo Campus Challenge in 1991, and only one official cartridge exists. Well, we found one of the rarest games ever created. However, this was never supposed to be available to the public, so can it really be considered the rarest game ever made if nobody really had a chance to buy it from retail? Well, let's go all the way back to the Atari 2600 to find some rare gems. Pepsi Invaders is one I always think about, a Space Invaders clone, but you obliterate 5 letters instead. It was made by Coke, and if anything, this game makes me want Pepsi. However, with only 125 cartridges within existence, it's easily one of the rarest 2600 games, but not the rarest. There's only like 13 known copies of Air Raid that exist. But then there's Red Sea Crossing, which was only available via mail order. 100 were apparently produced, but only 2 have been found. But then let's move over to the Sega Genesis. Tetris, I have $20,000, I know what I'm doing tonight. This version of Tetris was never officially released due to Nintendo having the rights to Tetris on consoles at the time, and only 10 copies are known to exist. But again, it wasn't officially released. How about the Super Nintendo competition cartridges? Now, Nintendo hosted 2 Super Nintendo competitions, Campus Challenge 92 and PowerFest 94. Similar situations to the NES competition cartridges. Very rare, not officially available to the public, so why not the Donkey Kong Country and Star Fox competition cartridges? They were edited versions of both games to be played in a competitive environment. They were only available via Blockbuster, and only 2,500 copies were made available. Are you kidding me? This is child's play. Come on, why talk about these when Air Raid exists? All right, I think I figured it out. See, these are potentially the rarest games of all time. One of these may just be the rarest game of all time. And after all the research, after all the eBay searches, I've come down to which one would give me the most unique game collection of them all. Which one is, in fact, the rarest game of all time? It's Sonic 2 with a line!
How does a